Hi, I'm James White. I wanted to give an idea of what I do in the wintertime as I'm coming out of winter and getting ready for spring. One of the major things that I deal with is deadouts. And a deadout is equipment where the bees have died. It happens to the best of them. It happens to everybody. In general, when I have a deadout that I need to deal with, I know about it in the field. I take the equipment apart while I'm in the field, wherever my hive happens to be. I take the frames up and I make sure that all the clumps of dead bees are out of the box. And the reason I do that is dead bees are mold. The bees will mold, the mold will spread to the equipment, and you'll have to deal with more frame replacement than you really want to. So I've brought in some of my deadout stuff. My goal right now is to process my deadout equipment and produce ready hives for a package. So what I'm going to do now is go through a little bit of processing to give you an idea of what we do. One of the first things I normally clean up is the queen excluders. Not everybody does this, but I always put a queen excluder on my starter hive. I put it between the brood box and the top feeder. This is a top feeder right here. Okay? I like to put a queen excluder underneath the top feeder because the queen has a tendency of going up into this area right in here, and they lay their wax, or they lay their eggs in there, and then I can never know where the queen is. So I put a queen excluder. And the other thing that I've learned, that if you're using a top feeder, the bees are really going to come up and drink this sugar water. What you're teaching them is how to go through a queen excluder. There's a lot of people who don't like queen excluders. They think they're bee excluders, and they prevent the bees from going up into the honey supers. What I'm essentially doing is training them on how to go through. So I've got a queen excluder here. You can tell that, the bees have been busy on this. There's a tremendous amount of wax. I like these kind of queen excluders with a nice heavy metal and a good wood frame around it. Some people use plastic. I find them impossible to clean, generally hard to work with. So what I come in here to do is I'm going to knock this wax off. And it's not ridiculous, by the way, for me to gather this wax up and maybe process it. I'm not going to get very much, but sometimes I need a little bit of wax for something and that I probably am not going to sell because this isn't high quality. So I take and scrape this down. Okay? And then usually at this point, because there's still a lot of wax in between, I just start running my tool up and down this until I've knocked every single one of these out. Now I'm not going to take this one to completion just for brevity. But just to say that once I go through that, I've taken all this wax nicely out, and I'll just push this aside for potential use later. The next thing I do is I bring out one of my boxes, my brood boxes, and I do use deeps for it. I will prepare these things in general, and every now and then I paint them, but they don't get painted every year. Your mileage may vary. I'm going to come in here and try to get rid of the excess wax on this, and then I'm going to start taking these apart, and I'm going to start evaluating these frames. Because if I've got a bad frame that isn't worth working with, and I can probably find a bad frame quick enough, here are some that are kind of iffy to me, but only a little bit, and we can talk about this. These have a bit of darkened wax, and the wax gets darker every time the queen lays eggs and the larva pupates within the cell. Every time that there's a cycle that goes on, the wax gets a little darker. So I can see lighter colored wax here, darker here. I've dealt with some that were just solid black. And I know people who will put a solid one back in there if it's still clean. I'm looking for built-out wax as much as I can. I do notice that there are little bits of cells here that have molded a little bit. But in general, when you look in these cells, what you're seeing is crystalline honey, and you're seeing pollen. And I like to get pollen back in there. I like to get crystalline honey back in when I put this together. Because when I put together my starter hive and what I'll call a package hive, and I generally need 20 to 25 package hives, so that's going to be my goal when I'm done building these. When I have all those together, that is a field-ready hive. I can take that hive out and set it wherever I'm going to put the package in and take off from there. So back to looking at this box, I'm going to take these frames out and then we'll take a look at them. But I'm going to do a quick cleanup of the box. We have learned from the Bee Lab and from other speakers that it's not a good idea to remove all the propolis. So I'm going to try to leave as much propolis as I can into it. And there's a lot of buildup here across, you can see. I'm going to take out the propolis that gets in my way, and I'm going to generally clean up these frames. For instance, this connecting wax here, I'm going to get rid of that. When I've got clumps of propolis right here on these edges, I'm going to knock that off. And the reason I'm going to do that is they won't go back in the box properly because the bees have already filled all the spaces. So I'm giving myself some room here to get them back in. And I'm also, once I have all these things out, all these frames out, I'm going to take and clean this part so that I can easily put my frames back in place. This other propolis that I've got along here and various other places, I'm just going to leave that in place. There are medicinal values to having that propolis in the box, so I'm going to leave it in place. Now I'm going to quick evaluate these things. You're always going to have some cells here that the hive left capped. They'll sometimes clean that up, but this is a good frame right here. This has got a lot of room for the queen to lay eggs. The wax is in still pretty good shape. There's a bit of food in here. I'm actually going to use one of these as a center frame. Get off some of that. What I mean by a center frame is I'm going to try to get the queen working right here in the center. I'm going to give her laying space, and then I'm going to work my way outward, and I'm going to make sure that there's more food on the outer edges. So some of these frames that I encounter, I'm hoping will have some food in it, but I'm looking at this one and I realize that this one doesn't have a lot of food in it. So I'm going to evaluate these things. This looks pretty good. It's got some burr comb down here that I can yank up. I can clean the bottom. And I mentioned I clean the tabs like this. And these look pretty good, so that I can get these hanging in there nicely. And then I'm going to work my way out. I had mentioned ones with some food. We went on vacation one time as a family and we had rented a house. And when we arrived, the house already had food in it. And they did that on purpose because they didn't feel we needed to go out and go shopping right away. It was so wonderful to arrive at that house and find food in the fridge. Here's a frame with some food in the fridge. So I'm going to make sure that when I build up this box, I've got some nice capped honey right there. I've got good cells that the queen can lay eggs in right away. There is some pollen, the dark stuff, the pollen in here, and that's not bad for them either. They'll make use of that. So I'm looking across a couple of boxes because I'll find that some of my boxes will have a lot of food in them because the bees died for some other reason. Some of my boxes will be totally empty. This is probably a bottom box. They ate through this one first. I want to point out that on this frame, notice how dark this is. It's getting almost to my threshold, but the cells look really nice. It's nice and empty. There's some good food on this side. I'm going to keep this frame. I'm going to keep it without popping it out and replacing it yet. So I go through this and I am choosing my frames to go back in. I'm trying to put a little food in there. And by the way, if I'm in a situation where I have to replace some foundations, and I suppose if I find a really nasty one, I can show how I pop it out and replace it. But if I get in a situation where I have to replace a really nasty one, I use the hard plastic foundations, and I'll buy a box of 100 every now and then, and I will pop out the old foundation and I will pop in the new foundation. But while I'm doing that, I usually have to clean around the inside of it, and in the groove at the top and the groove at the bottom, I have this tool here that allows me to dig into that groove and clean any of the wax or propolis out. So that is my groove cleaning tool. And if I have to replace, I keep these nice and handy. So what I'm doing right now is I am building up a home for a package of bees. So let me grab a few more of these and see what I got. Oh, here's one that's getting a little dark. It's got a few dead bees in it. I'm not overly worried about that. The bees will come in and clean that up nicely. It has some nice honey right there. It's got some nice honey on this side. This one's pretty good to go. This darker colored covering on it is actually just because the honey's frozen. And I'm not worried about that in any way. It's not mold. So I'm going to make sure that I've got a goodly amount of food on each end, and I'm going to make sure that I have some good egg laying areas in the middle. A thing that I do when I put the queen in, I'll take out a couple of these foundations like this. I'll take this foundation, this frame totally out, and I will take my sugar water and I'll hold this at this kind of angle and I'll pour sugar water right here. Usually I do it over the top of my feeder so that any sugar water that I miss, I pour right in here, and you'll watch as you pour across this thing, the sugar water will just suck right into each one of these comb cells. And then I can even turn it over and it doesn't even fall out. I'll pour more in on this side, and this frame goes from being light as a feather to nicely heavy. And what I'm doing is I am putting food right down where the bees can use it without having to go up and find the feeder just yet. So I'm putting my 10 frames in there. Here's the last one. It's always funny to see an area that they just choose not to build up. If I wanted to be particular about it and get them building up on that, I would get some liquid wax and just paint it on there. And that will encourage them to build up that part. And they may just do it themselves. So this is another nice frame that they can build. So here is a box that's ready. It was a dead-out box. And I usually do a quick check on the bottom. There's some weight to this. So I can tell I've got some honey in here. Otherwise the box would not be nearly that heavy. So at this point what I want to do is build a hive stack. So I grab one of my bottom boards. I won't put the entrance reducer in yet because they generally fall out. When I strap these together, the entrance reducer will fall out, so what I will take and do is, when I put this in the field, I carry a bucket of entrance reducers. Okay, so line that up. Yep, there's my lids falling over. Here is a queen excluder that I've, just like that one, I've just taken the tool over it and I've gotten all of the wax out of it. So I'm going to drop that in place. I'm going to throw on a top feeder. I like the top feeders. I know a number of people like to use frame feeders, and that's perfectly fine too. One of the things you have to do with a top feeder, which I do in the fall, is take these screws out, clean this whole thing really good. Make sure there's no dead bees in there, because there will be, okay? And then, you know, once you clean your feeder to put it away, take this and rebend it into perfect shape so that the bees have just the amount of space they need on both sides, and then screw them back in again. And it really brings it back to new. I also will put a hardboard. I just cut a number of these. It's nothing more than a piece of hardboard. And when I have a feeder on the hive, I put the hardboard on it. And the reason for it is when I put my telescoping outer cover on that, when I go to feed this, at that point I can lift up, slide this back, pour my water in. And I have generally found that even if I take the cover totally off like this, I can slide back just a little, pour my sugar water in, and I don't get a lot of bees flying in. I don't, you know, on a nice day, they're going to be out, they're going to be flying and all of that if I do this. And I do this instead of using an inner cover when I'm feeding. By the way, I also use this hardboard cover when I use a bee escape board for harvesting the honey. I do that because inner covers often let bees through. There's a lot of imperfections in an inner cover, and some actually have entrance and exit holes on the sides that lets bees go through. So I take off the inner cover, I put on a hardboard, and then I put this on for both when I'm harvesting honey and when I'm just setting up a first hive, a spring hive like this. So I pretty much got one here now. My next step is to grab a strap. I will have the Great Wall of hives ready to go before the packages arrive. For those that get packages, you know that they generally come in about the first part of April, even as late April. I've had them later than that, but that's usually dependent on weather in California. And now we just and there we go. And then I can set this aside and proclaim I have one. 24 more to go. So I want to look at a few more of these frames because the biggest questions I always get is, what's a good frame? What's a bad frame? So I thought I would look through a few of these, and if we can see one that we just kind of agree. This is one that I don't like. The bees have a whole bunch of cells in both sides that are just not capped. Now I know, or that are capped. I've had people tell me that's usually indication that there's something wrong in that cell and they don't want it exposed. I suppose it could also have been a dead bee. Now I know people will come in here and they'll do a bit of this, okay, and get rid of it like that. And you can, I'm just not a fan. What I really will do instead is pop this foundation out, clean this up, and put a new foundation in. So this is as easy as it takes right here. Yep, looks like I have some stuff in there. What did I do with my Hive tool, or my scraper tool. There it is. So I do a quick clean that, and clean that. And there's a new frame. When I deal with a new frame, I often will put this in the center. And then I put my waxed frames next to it and my feeder frames beyond that. Don't think you're doing the bees a big favor by giving them a lot of honey. Notice the frames that I put in my box down here had some honey on a few of the frames, both sides. If you give them a lot of honey, it just takes up space that the queen can't lay eggs. And she's prolific. When she gets laying, she's going to want to travel that whole box over, and she's going to want to lay eggs everywhere. So you have to give her space. So as she starts working out on the box, and you see the frames, that's when you're going to decide that you're putting a second brood box on top of that, and you go from there. Okay, so this is, what's that?
Do you pop the corners?
You know, Brenda just, my beekeeping partner here, she just brought up, do you pop the corners? And if you look close on this frame, you'll see that there is a kind of a perforated, a cutting across there. And I haven't been, but we can discuss this as part of the session. It's pretty easy to come in here and to knock this corner off. I think I would prefer to do it with a little pliers. If you do that, then that gives, there. If you knock that corner off, then that gives the bees a place to walk through. But if I'm looking at this, there's quite a bit of space on the sides of the frame for them to walk through. We'll talk about it. Maybe I'll change my ways. I've never knocked these things out, but there are probably advantages. It allows bees to get to the further out frames easier, but then again, they can always go up on top, they can always go to the bottom, they can always go to the sides. This just gives them a little faster area to get there. I normally, when we do our first session and I talk about getting ready for the year, different things that I do get ready, you know, I make sure that my toolbox is all ready, and here is my toolbox. And in it, I keep the things that I generally forgot to throw away the previous year. I also keep in it the tools I use on a regular basis. For instance, a level. I want my hive to sit and slightly slope towards the door. I don't want it to sit like this. I don't want it to sit like that. I don't want it to sit this way, because if you have it sloping to the back, any rainwater is going to flow across the bottom of the hive. I want any excess water, spilled sugar water, anything like that, to flow right out the entrance reducer and out of the hive. So I keep that handy for leveling. I keep staple gun handy because there's always times I have to attach either a mouse guard onto the front of it or something else to help out. I have my tools. This is for when I use oxalic acid. This little device here is a black light that allows me to shine it on frames if I suspect I've got American foul brood, which I haven't yet. And this is a nice way to, it makes the foul brood glow. Here are, this is a 9-frame spacer, because in my honey supers, which are all in the back wall over there, my honey supers, when they're totally waxed out, I always run a 9-frame. So this allows me to nicely do that. And by the way, if you think you don't have to clean up honey supers, that same concept of cleaning the junk between the frames and cleaning the ledge is really important to do if you're going to be able to step right up there and reframe your foundations, space them. Down here, I always have brushes. I keep cinnamon handy, and the reason I keep cinnamon handy is I have found that if I have an ant problem, and ants love to make colonies on top, on the inner cover of my hive. If I go up there and if I've got an ant problem, I will take that inner cover, walk a ways away, it must be miles to an ant, but walk a ways away and fling them all, and then I come back and I powder cinnamon across that inner cover. And I have found, because the cinnamon tree itself, the bark naturally fights ants, I think it does a good job to keep ants off of it. I keep some paper, I keep some old burlap, and various other tools for lifting and plugging holes and that kind of stuff. This is, of course, I use for starting a smoker. So I keep this all handy. This year I didn't repaint my tools, but I've still got time. I might still do it. But you want to have your hive tools all ready to go. Here's something else. Old 2x6s I pound together, and for me this is a hive stand. I drop this anywhere I need to have a hive, and I set my hive box on it, and away I go. Hopefully, if you have your hive at home, you have a very beautiful stand, and the neighbors gawk at it. It looks wonderful. But for me, I've got hives at 5 or 6 or 7 locations. They're usually under a tree overlooking a field, something like that. No one really cares how they look, but I do care that they're off the ground. Having something like this allows me to keep not having to replace my bottom boards very often. So let me look at a few frames here. We looked at that one. Let me go through a couple more. This one looks absolutely perfect. Okay, I've got nice clean cells all the way through. I've got a little bit of pollen right here, no big deal. It's light as a feather, there's no honey in it, but it's a good frame for a queen to move right in and start laying. Here's one that's got some pollen in it, like this. It's got some capped honey. And this one, they didn't build out very far. So I'd probably, if I use this one, I'll put it further out to the edge of the box. We're into that trouble zone again. I just don't like it when I have that many cells. This one's pretty dark, and it's starting to get some cells that are filled in. But then again, it's got some nice pollen in it. So I just might take and shoo this section out with the tool. And I might just go with that. That gives them some pollen. It gives them some cells to work with. Back here, I may just be a little selective on what I take out here. And then clean up some of the extras. I'll sometimes pull in a box that I'm tossing out most of the frames. And by the way, if I have mold, if you do what I do, okay, that you don't let a deadout set in the field with dead bees in it. If you know it's a deadout and you can't bring it home just yet, knock it apart, drop all the bees on the ground, put it back together again, and you'll find that you won't get the mold. The frames, the honey in them protects it from getting any mold, generally. If you get waxworms, that's not the term I'm looking for. If you get, I just forgot the name of it. Now, if you get the silkworm thing that attacks the hive, wax moths. If you get a wax moth and you open it up, you're probably going to replace all your frames, and you're probably maybe even burn some equipment, because you'll find really quick that they like to burrow. See, I don't like this one either, so this is going to go on my pile to toss. So when I say toss, means I'm just going to pop this out. This is going to get thrown away. This will get cleaned up, and I'll put a new foundation in it. Okay. Brenda said I'm running out of my time because I only want to talk for a little bit here. So I'll stop showing frames here other than You know, you're going to go through it and your experience is going to be different. You're going to have a certain threshold that you work from, that you look and you say, you know what, I don't like that, or I do like it. Don't throw away brood wax too quickly. Give the queen a chance to reuse it, because they use a lot of energy to make that wax. Okay, so like here, this is an awful lot of crystalline sugar and pollen. This is good wax. That'll definitely go back in for a queen. One of the things, just as a note from our shop here, we're building nuke boxes this year, and we're doing that so that maybe we can catch swarms and that kind of stuff and be a little bit more flexible. That's all I have here. We'll talk about it in the meeting afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you.